Yay! All right, this is quite a different makeup than I anticipated. So this was supposed to be upper extremity orthotics and kind of a 101 on why do we splint or what are the ins and outs of splinting. So you're going to get a very basic talk. So let's make it interactive, or if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free. When I've done this one in the past, I've had a bunch of brand new babies and new parents going, what is a splint and all? And so that's what this was geared for. But what questions you have, let us know. So the way it's set up is that we'll do kind of review orthotic materials, and then we'll look at what the purpose of orthotics, and then kind of look at some of the alternative options that are available. So with arthrogryposis, we know obviously there are multiple types of arthrogryposis. There are multiple types of arthrogryposis. However, the one common denominator is the multiple joint contractures from birth. However, how these contractures present and how they're addressed are as diverse as this wonderful population that we serve. One intervention approach is that of orthotics, or splinting, as everybody's called. And so to start off with, I thought we would kind of review what are the different thermoplastic materials. So when you come to see an OT, when you go to see the physician, they say, oh, you need a hand splint or so. Then you'll go to see an OT, and they start off with thermoplastic materials. And these are low temperature pieces of plastic. And the low temperature means that we put them in hot water, and then that's what makes them moldable, and then we can apply them to you. Prosthetic orthotics, they use high temperature, so they're going to put them in ovens, very, very stiff, very hard degrees. But these are low temperature. We put them in boiling water. You'll notice, oh, well, my child got a white one, my child got a colorful one. Could I have a colorful one? Can I have a perforated one? Well, a lot of that it's not necessarily just cosmetics and, you know, what we can try to make is beautiful for you or not. It has to do with some of the various properties that we're dealing with. And so some of them are more moldable, some are more drapable. So if I'm using, if I'm going to do an elbow orthotic, I want to have a piece of plastic that's going to be a little stiffer, that can really hold that elbow. Whereas if I'm doing some small individual fingers, or I need to have some intricate parts and all, I want to pick one of the plastics that's more drapable, that kind of gives you a little more, it just kind of oozes through your fingers so that you can kind of really form and mold those nicely. There's some that adhere to themselves. So sometimes after a surgery, you want to do one around the thumb, so the thumb stays in a specific position. When that takes place, you want to make sure that that splint material can hold on to itself and stick to itself. Whereas sometimes you're just making, like, once again, the elbow part, you kind of come around, but you don't want it to stick because then you'll never get your arm out. And so you kind of, there's actually different properties to these pieces of plastic that we're using. Some do come in colors, but most of them are your basic whites and tans. And then as you notice, some are solid and some have the perforations. And so this type of material then allows some of the breathing ability. And so some of our kids have some challenges with skin issues or so much sweat and things like that. And so we'll move and try to use some of the perforated. This is nice, although it gives you a rigid edge. And so you need to kind of work a little bit more with that. So that's just the basic of the thermoplastic materials. We're also going to kind of, this beginning part is kind of look at the different terminologies with that. Then we have strapping. So we've made the splint, we've got it there, but how in the world are you going to keep the little Houdinis in these straps? And so you typically are going to be using your Velcro or your Velfoam. Okay, the Velcro is nice and hard, pulls it across. The Velfoam is nice and soft. It has a little bit more of a little bit of give and take to it. So sometimes we'll make the Velcro if we want to hold it there, but we'll put make a little window cutout so it has like a little TV monitor and kind of pad that a little bit. We also use different kinds of Velfoam, and then you can use different kind of configurations. So like I like to use like a Y strap, and so we'll put that on the split and then it can go across the thumb so that you can have different pieces that way. Or in the elbow portion, we'll make an H, and that way we can bend it and you can have the strap go above and below the elbow. So it's kind of fun to play with this. What you're doing is you want to learn kind of the mechanics of the splint. So if I'm making a splint that is bringing a wrist up, then I want to come up and I want to, if the splint's down here, then I want to make sure my strapping is on top to help secure it. But how that strapping takes place is going to be how you best keep it in there. So you can maybe do one single strap and that works great, but other kids, they can get out of that right away. As soon as they sleep, it pops out. So you can look at X figures, you can look at all different types of strapping material. We've even gone with Coban at some points. Is kind of like I always call it kind of like your stretchy A-straps. And sometimes parents will do that as well. And then we also put, sometimes people will put the splints on and then they'll apply a sock over it so the kids can't get through it at night, particularly when they're sleeping. Some of them still are able to pull it out. Then we come to the lined and unlined. Like I say, it's a hard piece of plastic that you're putting on these children. And so there is a moleskin and foam that's available. And to that, I just say yes, because I have some parents that come through and say, oh, I need to have the moleskin in here because it's wonderful. It absorbs the sweat. It kind of comforts. It's nice and soft. It's not against a hard piece of plastic. And then I have just as many parents come through and say, oh, no, I don't want the moleskin because it absorbs all the sweat and it holds it there and it can't be cleaned. And then it actually makes it hotter than just the plain plastic and I can wash the plastic out. So I think the moleskin is more a line of comfort and what's going to be best for you. Another terminology you'll hear with splinting is static and dynamic. So you have your basic static splints, those are ones that are holding in one position and they're not moving, whereas your dynamic gives us moving parts. Many times your elbows, we want to work on flexion and extension, so we might have a dynamic component to that. Or if we've done some of our tendon surgeries, we'll bring that wrist up, and once again, we'll also use the dynamic component to that aspect. Okay, so that's just kind of the basics or the kind of terminology that we use with different splinting areas. So now we'll go into the specifics. So orthotics need to be lightweight, they need to be durable, and they need to be washable. Although this is a very old quote, it's kind of a nice one. The orthotics fulfill a purpose in simplicity without losing functional purpose or creating dysfunction. Okay, so we want to fulfill the purpose that the splint is for without losing functional purpose or creating any dysfunction. All right, so there's different types of splinting. One is corrective. These are the ones that force the involved joint into optimal alignment. I think everybody has probably gone through these as an infant stage. Then we also have protective, and these are the ones that protect the weak muscles from being overstretched following surgical procedures or to protect a surgical intervention. And then we also have supportive. And these are ones that support a weak joint, place it in a functional position for use of fingers or thumb to perform grasp and prehension patterns. So let's start off with corrective. And if anybody has any questions, like I said, we have a small enough group and it's not the group I anticipated, so feel free to ask any questions as we go. So to begin with, we start with corrective, the ones that force. Okay, I think this one is the most familiar with our orthotics, and basically you're introduced to them on day one. So we've learned from the literature, connective tissues are most compliant shortly after birth, and early manipulation may provide an opportunity for a somewhat typical joint to form. We've learned that early stretching and custom splinting provides gains in range of motion and activity participation. So I think one of the key things to remember is we're looking at splinting here, but it's custom orthotics with range of motion. I think that range of motion is always a critical and a key factor for children with AMC. And corrective orthosis, or those that hold in a specific position, can be used throughout the ages. So we're going to look at the alignment of our hands, okay? We're going to look at that flexion and extension. So a lot of times we're bringing the wrist up. We need to consider the ulnar deviation. Sometimes that's a little complicated to both bring your wrist into an extended position and then get the proper alignment. So sometimes we give and take, or we play a little bit with those components. We're looking at our fingers. We're looking at the palmar arches. So with AMC, it's very critical to try and get to that flexed position so that you can get a nice grasp of something. And so to splint like this, let's not work on that. Let's see if we can start our arches early and bring a hand into a more functional position. And we're looking at some of our range of motion. Our wrist-hands orthosis are working on wrist and finger position, and they should provide as much of a functional hand as possible. And then we have our elbow orthotics, and these need to be cautious at the beginning, as the anatomical alignment is often a challenge. So a lot of times our children that are born in extension, it's kind of difficult to understand where exactly is that elbow joint. And so many times we don't sometimes splint those right off because we wait to see if we can start to get some sort of movement, and we get a little bit of flexion seen there. And many times your physician will take a look at x-rays or kind of do an ultrasound to sort, kind of say, oh, this is inflection extension, and then we can progress with that. So we need to be very careful when you are looking, first of all, with some of those early elbow orthotics. When do you wear these corrective splints? Different schedules at different times. So a lot of facilities will say 24/7 when they're first born, because once again, it's the time that we are able to do as much movement and we're trying to get that joint going. But it's also very important to don't forget that whole sensory input. You need to love your baby. We need to play with their hands. We need to feel them. And so, as we said earlier, we have our orthotics, but also that range of motion. So although we want you to wear the orthotics, the intent is to wear it as much as possible, you'll also need to take those orthotics off and hold their hand and kind of move them and do the range of motion. So that's very, very important. It's very important for bonding. That's very important for the child to also learn that these are my hands and they're not just stuck in these plastic pieces. So I think there's a little give and take, but the more you can do in those first few months, the more stretch we can get and hopefully have a better outcome. Then as the children start learning to use their hands, to be able to, when they find their hands, when they come around, like, oh, there it is, when they start reading it, then let's start moving over to nights and naps. So when they're sleeping, when they're not necessarily using their hands for activities, then we can go ahead and give this prolonged stretch when function is not required. So once again, we want to have a simplistic in the purpose, but we don't want to create dysfunction. And so saying, oh, well, great, I have my 1-year-old and they're wearing their splints all the time. Well, they're not exploring their environment. They're not using their hands for things. So let's take it off at that point and progress to nights and naps. We also, as in this child, a lot of times some of our kids wear like a full armor to go to bed. They have their leg braces on, they have their helmet on, they have their TLSO on, now we have elbows and hand splints. It's like, oh my goodness gracious. So I think sometimes we also need to pay attention to the family needs, family sanity, and maybe alternate. So sometimes they'll have a child that has their the right hand splint on this night and their left elbow splint, and their left hand or their right elbow splint. So I think we can be flexible. I think it's once again, arthrogryposis is something that all families should work together, should interact with and things. And so I think orthotics can be along those same lines. What needs to be best for you and how you can best serve your child. Any questions on the protective or the corrective orthotics? Okay, we'll move to protective. So our protective or protect weak muscles from being overstretched following surgical procedures to protect surgical intervention. So these are our orthotics that come along after the different surgeries, and they're going to be protecting during that time frame. So a lot of the humeral rotational osteotomies, it is a splint, but it's a Sarmiento brace. But it's that high temperature and low temperature that I talked at the beginning. So these are usually done at our P&O department because they're more of a high temperature. They go down there, they get it fit and molded. It's not necessarily a custom mold one from OT. But then we have our elbow surgeries. So we do the capsule releases or the triceps lengthening. And then here we kind of make the braces. So we have dynamic locking braces to allow for joint movement. And so here at our facility, we have kind of embrace the protocol that we do the releases and then we put them in a movable splint and we start moving right away. So we'll have them a certain amount of time in a flex position, and then we go ahead and bring them out for like an hour extended, and then we bring 3 hours flex and we go back and forth there. So that's that dynamic type of splint that we were talking about. Once again, this is following a surgical intervention. Our wrist and thumb surgeries, when we talk about our carpal wedge osteotomies, when we talk about our tendon transfers, our thumb releases, you'll know a lot of time you'll go into your cast, and then following your cast removal, then you'll need to have a splint or fabricated right away to continue to protect that joint during these during the healing time. When are we wearing these orthotics? Well, that's once again very protocol dependent. A lot of times full time and then progressing to nighttime wear, particularly when you're wearing it for specific activities and such. So the protective kind, this is done primarily with your surgical interventions, and then you have a specific protocol for when you're wearing it. And then supportive. Support a joint that is weak, placed in a functional position to permit use of fingers, thumb, full range of motion to perform grasp and prehension patterns. These are kind of the most fun to make. I love these. This is where we can get creative. We have the neoprene. Benex, as a lot of children will use that because they want to bring their thumb out. And so it's kind of a neoprene. It's kind of like scuba diving material that helps bring that thumb out. So hopefully that will help with pinching and grasping. Is it doing a prolonged stretch? Not necessarily, but is it getting my hand in a functional position so I can use it for tasks? Yes, and so that's exciting. But then the custom molded can be to help with anything. And this is a time where kind of if you can imagine it, then let's try it. Bring your ideas and say, okay, if I could just do this or that. And when you're going to be wearing these, they're activity dependent. So this child here doesn't have any kind of finger grasp and all, but would really like to be able to write. And so this is a basic thermoplastic splint, holds the wrist up. And then we added a little piece here with a locking clip, so you can put your pen in there and they can write just fine. So it's kind of an exciting, we're able to give them a writing tool. So it's a supportive type of splint. So splint she uses for writing. You don't necessarily have to wear it when you go to bed or anything like that. There's different types, but this kind is kind of fun for that. And likewise, it can be thermoplastic material. It can just be coming and thinking outside of the box. What can we do to make you the most functional that you can be? So this first picture here, this little one, I mean, she would hold on to her hand and you know, bite her sleeves and stuff like that, and always have big wet spots. So this is just a matter of taking a piece of Velcro and a bead, and you put that on. They have these lovely bracelets. They can be all different kind of colors, and then you can just hold that and move your arm around just fine without getting your sleeves all sopping wet and going. This one here in the middle is a basic clothespin. So the clothespin is holding the pencil, and then we have a kind of a rubber band or a string here at the top, an elastic piece that holds it upright. So they can grasp the clothespin, and that's moved on to the writing. This device is kind of like almost like a hoverboard. It's got you see the top of it has a little shiny piece, and so she could hold her pencil but not able to move the whole hand. And so this was made so that it could dip back and forth and go side to side, and then the kind of anti-friction of the board on there allows her to write. She can do cursive and do all kinds of stuff with that little bit of support there. So orthotics also come at a point that you can kind of look at all different adaptations and all different ways of kind of creating. And just come to your occupational therapist and say, hey, you know, this is my idea. This is what I'm kind of, what I think is lacking, or this is what I need. And then you can kind of think through all those different kinds of orthotics, the different materials that we have, which ones are more drapable, which ones can we move this with, and how can we make that so that you can be as independent as you can be. All right, so then thinking kind of outside of basic orthotics, we've talked about the materials that we use and some of the just terminology, and then what kinds of orthotics we are. We have the corrective, the protective, and then the supportive. And then kind of what else is out there? What is kind of other things that we could use to help with our arms? There are the basic upper extremity exoskeletons, or kind of overhead slings that a lot of people have tried. If you go up more into the northeast, then you have the Rex with the Wilmington robotic exoskeleton. And then there's also, once they came out with that, there's a lot of articles out there, a lot of people then publish homemade devices and homemade ways of making that. And so I think earlier today, one of the places we're talking about, just Google it, and you can certainly find some of these exoskeletons. They provide an anti-gravity use of the upper body while promoting fine motor skills, so they kind of help get your arms in different places. There's been kind of, you can find people that find them to be fantastic, and you can find just as many people that say they were a lot of equipment, very cumbersome, and really didn't help much. So I think it needs to depend on, once again, arthropoiesis is very unique for each person, and so what works great for you may not work for the other person, but you need to be aware of all the different options. Kinesio taping. Kinesio taping is kind of, I think, becoming more and more prevalent out there. I brought a piece of this with me as well, and y'all are more than welcome to feel any of this, but I feel everybody here is kind of knowledgeable on splints. It's a uniquely designed elastic type of tape, and it kind of is meant to mimic kind of the quality of skin. It enhances the function of many different tissues and physiological systems. So what they say is that when you put this on, it kind of lifts the skin, so it allows a little more blood flow underneath, as well as gives you a little bit of a sensory input. And when you feel this, it's got like an elastic piece to it. And so your therapist will go and take a class and learn how to use this. And it kind of talks about the origins and insertions. So you need to understand how the tape stretches, accepts loading, recoils, breathes. There's different patterns and different ways that they express this to it. And so, like, if you want to encourage your biceps to be using, you're going to be applied to the origin and then the insertion, and it'll hopefully facilitate your muscle function to kind of encourage that muscle to say, oh, let me use this. Let me try to activate this a little more. Likewise, you could also use it on the triceps. If you have an overactive triceps, put it in the different direction, apply it from the insertion to the origin, and then hopefully that will help guide those muscles and kind of encourage them to more inhibit muscle function. So I think we're starting to see a lot more of the Kinesio taping used with a lot of our children. Once again, there is not necessarily literature. We have literature for your basic orthotics, but there's not necessarily literature out there yet for some of the Kinesio taping aspects. Serial casting. Serial casting, a lot of people also ask about serial casting. And typically a lot of this is done for the elbow, although I've talked to a few different adults here this time around that actually had it for their hands as well. But in our facility, we primarily done it for the elbows. You usually come for weekly cast changes, usually lasting 4 to 6 weeks. I have spoke to some physicians that are like, yes, let's get the casting going. And I have some physicians that are like, that would be my last result to try to do that. So once again, work individually with your team, kind of see what people's perspectives and thoughts are there. And then the modalities. I have to say I am not very knowledgeable in this aspect at all. It is out there. The NES systems are contraction for exercise, a fast twitch and a slow twitch. They talk about the FES. A lot of times we have the FES spikes, and they give you a contraction during a muscle test, so you can try to work some of those muscles, and you'll be doing you'll be on a hand bike, and then that will click in and activate, so that can be timed. It's quite challenging with children, and because you don't want to make sure you don't cross any growth plates and all, as well as our children are small and those muscles are very weak. So there is some people that are starting to try that out. I see it a lot more in the lowers than in the uppers. And like I say, I'm not as experienced with that, but it's out there, and so I felt we should put it here to go as well. And that's about all I had. Like I say, I'm kind of talking to a lot of people that have had numerous splints and things like that. So